Welcome to It's Time for Yarn. Today is a new color pooling tutorial that was requested by a subscriber. They asked me if I could try to color pool with Hobby Lobby's I Love This Yarn in Old Glory. Now they messaged me, they're like, I just know in my soul that it will color pool, but I just can't figure out how to do it. Can you please take a look at this yarn and see if you can get it to color pool? And I'm like, you know, I am up for a challenge. So we are going to take this Old Glory yarn. Sorry, it doesn't have a label. My little puppy, she loves yarn and she chewed the label off. So, but we're going to turn it into this. Now, I really like the look of this. It's a little bit different than the traditional Argyle. Like the squares aren't as distinct as other yarns might be. And that's the trickiest part about this yarn, is that the color changes are pretty short in some cases, and they're not the most crisp, I guess is the word. In some spaces, you know, like right there, that's almost a little bit purple where that red and blue come together. There are definitely some spaces where the white and the red overlap and it's kind of pink. So we have to work with those things and just kind of accept it as what it is. So if you're ready, let's roll up our sleeves and get this project going. To get this project started, we have our yarn in I Love This Yarn in Old Glory. We have a 5.5 millimeter hook, and then we have a 5 millimeter hook. Now you can use any hooks that you prefer. These are just two that I had. I just grabbed them up real quick. And I do have a stitch marker ready that I may or may not need, but I'm going to have it ready just in case. Now, when I start my land pulling project, making a chain, now usually I would study the yarn to see if I could see the color change, see if I could find out what the sequence is. But since I have spent a lot of time with this yarn, I can go ahead and tell you now that it's a little chaotic looking, just looking at it in a single strand. So let's take a look at it as a chain so that we can discover what the sequence of this colorway looks like. Okay, so we're just going to start in any place. It doesn't really matter where you start because we're trying to get the colorway to reveal itself, the sequence to reveal itself. So it doesn't really matter where we start. Okay, so right away, I'm noticing that I have short color changes in the red and white and a large color change in this blue section. So it looks like maybe I have a long blue section flanked with a white and a red. Okay, so this may be the color sequence, or there may be more to it. Let's take a look. Let's keep going. Okay, let's see where we are now. I'm back to some blue. Is this another long section of blue? No, see, this is a short section of blue. So over here, it looks like it is, this section makes a color sequence, but then we have like a red and two whites and then two blues on the side there. So let me see, we've got even more before we get back to a large blue section. So right now the pattern is kind of all over the place. If you ask me, it's not as clear cut as other yarns. In other yarns, the sequence is a lot shorter, but this one has a lot going on. Okay, so here's another large blue section. So it looks like, you know, we have this here, then we've got maybe that, and then we have a red, white, and blue on the or a red and white, and then the blue starts again. So it starts that first section again. So in order to help my mind figure out where to begin and end the color sequence, I'm going to use this large blue section as a visual marker because these shorter pieces, it can get confusing as to which short section we're on. Is it in this part of the colorway, that part? And since it's only 3 colors, but the sequences are different as you go along, it can get confusing. So I'm going to use this large blue section as my visual marker. So I'm going to actually, in my mind, start the pattern, whatever it might be, at the end of this blue section. So I'm going to start here. I have a white, red, blue, white, red, white, blue, red, white, and then I have a large blue on the end. So I've included the blue, but not until the end. So in my mind, this is what the color sequence is. Now, that being said, I'm going to make more of this chain all the way until I get back to this large blue section. So here is the entire color sequence that we are focusing on here. So I'm going to chain again. It's going to be a short white section, short red, short blue, all the way until I get back to a long blue section. So let's get started on that. Make sure my chain's not twisted. Here's a blue. Is this our long blue section? No, that was a short blue section. So we're going to keep going because we haven't made it all the way through our color sequence yet. We have to make it all the way through the sequence in order for our color pooling to line up correctly. Okay, so there's a blue section. I'm going to do one more so it's fully white. There's a large blue section. So I've gone through this color sequence twice. So I start here at the end of this large blue. That's the beginning of my sequence. Through to that large blue section, it starts again at white, all the way through to another one. Now, at this point, I can turn around, but I am going to need double the length of what my project will be in order for it to fit on the chain, because we're going to be skipping chains. So if I want my project to be this long as this chain is, I need to keep going with my chain because it's going to shrink up as I go along when I start my first foundation chain. I'm actually going to leave it here for the sake of this tutorial, but if you want a wider piece, then you need to chain on more until you get back to the next large blue section. As long as you end with a large blue section with a white loop on your hook to begin our next row, you will be set up for success with this color pooling. Now, if you wanted a shorter project, you could always just do one sequence here. So that maybe you're making a rag or a pillow cover, a small bag. You know, you want it to be smaller, then you would just use one color sequence, but you would need to go through the entire sequence before you turn around. All right, let's move on to row 1. Now with the moss stitch, this is what we're going to use. It's a single crochet and a chain, and when you get started, you start on the 4th chain from your hook. So we're not counting this one on the hook, we're starting in the next one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and now at this stage, I'm still using my larger hook because I'm going straight into the chain, and I'm going to need to see how many stitches I can make. Now, this is where this yarn's a little tricky because that is kind of muddy. It's a pinkish color where the red starts in, but I am going to consider it a white. So I have 2 white stitches, okay? And then I'm going to skip one, put in a red. Now I only got 1 red stitch. That's okay. So I did 1 single and then I did a chain, and I have blue on my hook next. Skip a space. 1, 2. I got 2 blues. Okay, next we're skipping between each single crochet, single and a chain. So 1 white there and 1 white here. Okay, now I only had 1 red stitch on the last color section, so I may only have 1. It's a little longer looking, so we might have 2 on this one. Let's see. Skip a chain. 1, 2. Okay, so we got 2 reds that time. So that tells me that sometimes there'll be 1 red stitch and other times there'll be 2. So I'm going to have to be paying attention to where I am with that in my color sequence, because I have to be consistent throughout the entire project. Okay, 2 whites. And blue is next. Now look, again, it's kind of almost white, but I don't want to make these too tight. I don't want to try to squeeze in a third white stitch, because as I get to my rows that are farther up, I'm going to have to be going around these chain ones, and that uses up more yarn. So I don't want to try to force there to be a third one. I'm going to leave it at 2. All right, so we're skipping a chain between each single crochet. Let's see how many blues we get here. 1, 2. Okay, 2. And remember, my visual cue, I'm looking for that long blue section. So I ended with the long blue section on my foundation chain, and I've turned around. And so as I stitch across, I know that when I get back to that long blue stitch, that long blue section, that I am back to the end of my color sequence. Okay, let's skip one. We're at a red. It might only have 1 stitch. Okay, so we have another red stitch that's just 1. Okay, and white here. Now, I usually don't like when there's any kind of different color in a stitch at all. So I'm going to actually back this up and make these a little bit looser, because I know I only have enough to make 1 red, but I don't want that much of that pink in there on that next stitch. Okay, that's a little better. Now with this yarn, I'm just going to have to be okay with some spaces being a little bit muddy, because that's just how this yarn is dyed. So I can't really do anything about that. 1, 2, okay, 2 whites. And then, oh, here we go. We're back to our long blue section. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now at this point I can decide that this is long enough. This is as wide as I want my project. Again, if I'm making like a small bag, a pillow for like a baby doll, or just a little accent piece to put somewhere, this is where I would turn around, because I'm at the end of my long blue piece. I want to make this a little bit wider, so I'm going to continue until I get back to the next blue section, large blue section. Okay, so let's keep going. I'm going to be consistent with the number of stitches that I'm using. So for example, in this first time around, I used 2 whites. So I'm going to use 2 whites again. The next stitch was only 1 red. So I'm going to make sure that I only do 1 red in this section. Then I have 2 blues, and I'll do 2 blues, and so on. So here we go. We had 2 whites. We're going to skip that chain, go in there and make 1 red, because that's what I did the first time. 1 red. Let's do 2 blues. That's next. 1, 2. Okay. Let's see where we are. 2 whites, then 2 reds. Okay. 1, 2. If you needed to, you could try to use a stitch marker to help you mark where you are on this row. I think I'll just use my second hook here to kind of like mark where I am. So let's double check that. We have our long blue section where we turned around. 2 whites, 1 red, 2 blue, 2 whites. Now I'm at 2 red and 2 whites. So I'm going to move this over to help me remember where I am. We're going to do 2 reds and 2 whites. Now I don't have to do that with every project I'm working on, where I'm marking where I am in the sequence, but because the color sequence in this yarn is so sporadic, it's not as consistent or clear as other yarns, I'm going to do that to help me keep up with where I am and make sure I'm consistent in my stitches. I have to have the same number of stitches each time I do the colorway. If I don't do that, if I don't have the same number of stitches each repeat of the color sequence, my argyle is not going to work out. And that can be really frustrating after doing all this studying. All right, so we're back to this blues. We have 2 blues, 1 red, and 2 white. So I'm going to move this over. I can remember that. 2 blues, 2, 1, 2, here we go. Come on. 1 red, and 2 whites. Be sure you're skipping a stitch between each single and doing that chain 1 after your single crochet. All right, and then now we're back to our 3 blues, which is the end of our color sequence. So here we go. 1, 2, 3 with a chain 1. Now I do have this much chain left over. If I think I have enough to do another sequence, I could keep going, but I'm going to stop here and I'm going to switch to my smaller hook. Now I needed to use my bigger hook initially because I was just going into the chain and I wanted to keep it loose so it doesn't curl, doesn't get too tight. But now that I'm working on in the working stitches where I'm going to be the rest of my blanket or whatever I'm making, my project, I need to use the smaller size hook because I'm going to be going around these stitches as I'm going along, and that uses a little bit more yarn, and I got to make sure that I can be consistent with these number of stitches. So I have 1 chain here. When I'm on the end of a moss stitch, I need to chain 2 on the sides, and sometimes I may have to chain that a little tighter than I usually do in order to have enough yarn to make my next stitches. So that being said, we have white on our hook next. We should be okay with that tension there. And I'm going to use this hook now to help me mark where I am in my color sequence. So again, here's my long section of blue. That's where I ended on this end over here. So my next 2 stitches are white. 1, 2. Again, this one's a little muddy with the red, but that's the nature of this yarn and we're just going to be okay with it. So I have 2 whites, a red, and 2 blue. So that's where we're going to go with these stitches here. We've got to be consistent. So I'm going to go into that very first chain 1 space. We have a single crochet here and then a chain 1 space there. So I'm going to go in there and do my 1 single and a chain 1. And then I'll go into the next space there, do my second white and a chain 1. Okay, so I've got my 2 whites in. It's not quite as muddy this go around, so that's nice. Then I'm going to do my 1 red and then 2 blues. 1, 2. Now I'm going to do this a little bit tighter so I get that second blue in there because I was running out of blues. Okay, let's see what we need now. I'm checking my sequence to make sure it's the same. 2 whites, 2 red, 2 white. Okay. Here we go. 2 white. 1, 2. Now this white is a little bit pink, but we're going to be okay with it. It is what it is. That's considered a white. 2 reds. 1, 2, and then 2 whites again. 1, 2. Okay. Let's check back where we are in our sequence. 2 blue, 1 red, 2 white. Okay. 1, 2 blue, 1 red. Okay. And then 2 whites. 1, 2. Okay, and we're at blue. And that is our large section of blue. So that means we're at the end of our color sequence. We're going to keep going till we get to the end of our piece here. But we're going to pay attention to the fact that, yes, we are back to the end of our sequence. So we need to make 3 blues. 1, 2, 3. Okay. The next part of our sequence here, it's a little harder to see, but right here it is 2 whites, 1 red, 2 blue. Okay, so two whites, 1 red, 2 blue. I'm gonna stick that needle there. Does anybody else call them needles? The hooks, call them needles. I was taught to crochet by a very old woman who had been crocheting for much longer than I had been alive at the time, and she called them needles, and so I still call them needles. All right, here we go. Back to work here. 2 whites, 1 red, 2 blue. Okay. 2 whites. Now these whites are a lot muddier than what I would like, but it just is what it is with this yarn. 1 red. And this is another reason why I say this is a more intermediate color pulling yarn, because when you're color pulling, you really want these to not be muddy, but we're doing the best we can with it. Okay, 2 blue. Oop, come back here. Okay, what's next in the color sequence? Uh-oh. Looks like 2 white, 2 red, 2 white. Okay. 2 white, 2 red, 2 white. Okay. Next we have 2 blues, 1 red, 2 white. Alrighty. 2 blue, 1 red, 2 whites. 1, 2. Okay, and we should be back. Yes, we're back at the long blue section, and that was 3 blues. I just remembered that because we've been doing this, so I remember. But if you don't, you can go back and look at your work, and we have 3 blues at the end of our sequence. 1, 2, and 3. Now we are on the 3rd row of our project. This is where the magic happens. Okay, so this is where we are looking for a diagonal to appear. Now we may have to control this. This is also called controlled color planning, where you plan where the colors land. So we may have to do some planning with this, but we'll see. So I have 1 chain here. Let's do another because we need 2 to turn the corner. We're going to turn our work. Again, we're going to go into that chain 1 space there. So we have 2 whites. So 1, 2. Okay, so now if I continue like this, my colors are going to stack on top of each other. These 2 whites are on top of each other, and red would be next, then 2 more whites, and they're right on top of each other. Excuse me, 2 more blue. They're right on top of each other, and that is not what we want. We want a diagonal. So what we're going to do is we are going to make these 2 stitches into 1 stitch so that we have a red here so that it lines up diagonally with this red here. So let me show you how to do that. Okay, I'm going to go back to my chain 1s that I had on the side, the 2 chain 1s. I'm going to take both of them out, and I'm going to loosen them up just a little. I don't want them to be too loose because then it'll make bumps on the side of my work, but I'm going to do them a little looser. Then I'm going to do a half double crochet where that white is. I'm going to do it kind of loose because I need to use up all of that white. Okay, so now I have 1 white stitch right there. Then I'm going to do my 1 red stitch. All right, so now I have a red diagonal, a white diagonal. Now I have 2 blues next. 1, whoops, 2. So now my blues are going in a diagonal with each other. Another reason why this is an intermediate yarn is because of the marled kind of look. It can be difficult to see your stitches, see your diagonals. But here you go. We have 2 blues here, 2 blues there. We have one red next. Oh no, we don't. We have two whites next. Excuse me. We're looking at the first row to find your diagonal. So in this next space, we need a white stitch here and a white stitch there. One, two, okay, and then I have two reds. So let's do two reds that are diagonal from each other. One, two. All right, so now our diagonal is set up and we are on our way to making this beautiful pattern. Now that being said, where I made this half double crochet, I'm going to have to do that every single time I get to this particular section of white. I won't have to do it in any other space, but in this one, I will have to make those two stitches into one using a half double crochet. So I'm going to take my stitch marker and I'm going to mark that section of my work so that it gets my attention, so that I don't accidentally miss making that into one stitch. Because if I don't do that, if I keep going and I do my two stitches as I'm going along, it's going to mess up my diagonal and then I won't have my beautiful pattern that I'm looking for. So I'm going to put that there just to get my attention as I'm working. Let's continue down to the end here. And I'll show you what to do when you get to this half double crochet, how to make it look seamless. Okay, so we're back to white. We have two whites. Now at this point, I don't really have to count a whole lot. I can let the yarn tell me what it wants to do. So this is a short piece of blue, and in my mind, I remember my pattern, it only had two blues. And then I can see here too, in this row, there's two blues that I'm lining up diagonally with. So I don't really have to count. I don't really have to do much thinking. I just have to do some observing. Okay, so my next stitch down here is one red. So I'm gonna do one red and keep it moving. Now I'm going to do two whites. Really, once you get that first row established and get your diagonal set up, this really moves along quite easily. Okay, so we're back at the three blues, which at this point we know is the end of our color sequence. But now that we've got it set up, it doesn't really matter that we're at the end of it. We're just going to keep on going. My next two stitches are white. I have two white stitches. And then one red. So we are always looking at not the row that's directly beneath, but the one below that. So two rows down is where we're looking to make this diagonal. So this is a red, white, red. Next we're going to have blue, white, and then I need a blue here. One, two blues. Now I am using my tension to control where the colors land. So I'm making sure that I have two stitches in this white by how tightly or loosely I'm using this yarn. I'm stitching this yarn up. I've got to make sure that I'm paying attention to the fact that I'm going to get two white stitches. I'm at the two white stitches, so I've got to make sure that I get those two stitches, that I don't have three, that I don't have one. I've got to have two so that they're diagonal from each other. Next is blue, and it's just two blues, so I'm going to make sure that my blues land with two stitches. Next is one white. Now, if I wanted to, I could squeeze that real tight and squeeze out a second red stitch, but that would make my diagonal off. I need it to just be one. So we're just going to do one red stitch. Next is two white stitches. Again, all I'm doing to remember my sequence now is looking down at the row below. So I did two white stitches. Next is three blue stitches. One, two, three. Now I'm at the end of this row and I don't have any stitches down here to look at to know how many of these whites I need. And I remember that it's two, but if you don't remember that it's two, all you got to do is find a section of your three blues. Here's one right here. And take a look at what comes next. Here's 3 blues. Next was 2 whites. So as I'm going around this corner, I've got to make sure that I have 2 white stitches. One of them is going to be right here in this last little stitch. I've got my V stitch here, my single crochet, and there's a space in between that chain there. Might be kind of hard to find, but there it is. I'm going to put 1 white stitch there. I'm going to chain 2. Now I'm going to pull my tension a little tight because I'm running out of white, and I know that I have to have another one when I turn around. So I've done 1 here, and I'm going to turn around and do another one. All right, so I got my second white stitch, and you'll notice it's diagonal right there with that white stitch. White, blue, white. Next should be a red, just 1. There it is. Okay. We're going to keep going in the same sequence that we just did all the way until we get to the end. And I'm going to show you what to do with that half double crochet on the end and how to make sure those stitches stay looking beautiful. So we're going to keep going. You stitch along, and I will meet you at the end in just a moment. Now right here, this is too much blue on the hook. My next stitches are white, and I don't want the top of that first stitch to be blue. I want it to be white. So I'm going to take this back, and I am going to make these stitches a little bit looser so that it uses up more of that blue yarn so that I have more white on my hook rather than blue, because I want that next stitch. That's still kind of a lot, so I have to decide, am I going to be okay with that little bit of blue being on there? And the way this yarn is dyed, it's not specifically designed for color pulling, so it doesn't necessarily follow the color pulling rules. So I just have to be okay with that little bit of blue there so I can get my 2 white stitches and be set up for my red stitch next. Okay, so now I'm back to this half double crochet that I did in white, and I have 1 more of my blue stitches to do. This is where I have 3 blue stitches, 1, 2, 3. So I've got to do 1, 2, 3. But you'll notice that this makes kind of a wider gap right there. It's kind of like a big space. If I were to just go into it normally, it would make a big, huge hole, and I don't want that in my work. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to put my stitch, instead of directly into that space, I'm actually going to go down to the stitch beneath, and I'm going to pick up both legs of the single crochet that's down there, and I'm going to go around all of that so that it pulls that hole closed. You see that? Now it's not a big gaping hole. I won't have to do that very often, just when I get to this particular section. And I have my stitch marker here to remind me when I feel it in my hand, oh yeah, I need to pay attention to this white piece because I need to make just 1 stitch. Normally it would be 2, but in order to set up my diagonal, I had to make it do what I wanted it to do and make it to be 1 stitch. So now I'm going to do a half double crochet again with that white right there on the end. And then chain 2. Now, when it's on the edge like this, it works out nicely because you use up more yarn making those chain 2s. So when you have to use up that yarn to make 1 stitch, it makes it a little easier. So now when I turn around, I have to have 1 red stitch to be the diagonal here. And again, I have that big hole. So again, I am going to go down into that stitch underneath rather than into the space. I'm going to go into that stitch there. Okay, I only picked up 1 leg, so I've got to try again and get both legs. Okay, if I can. If I can't get both legs, 1 leg will do. Okay, so now it looks kind of funny, but in the big picture of your project you're making, you won't really notice that, especially with the busyness of this pattern. Okay, so now my next diagonal is going to be a blue. So I've got to go into that next space there. 1, 2. And then I've got a white next. 1, 2 whites. And again, that white's a little bit pink, but we just know that's going to happen with this yarn. And my next stitch is down here, 2 rows below, 2 reds, so it'd be 2 reds. Now I'm going to stop here because we are well established with our sequence, and as you keep going, as your project grows, it will eventually look like this. Now, when you're looking at it like this, it does not look like much. It looks kind of like a mess. This is where you have to trust the process and keep going. As long as you get those diagonals lined up properly and pay attention to where this single stitch is instead of 2, you are going to be fine. You're going to make a beautiful project like this one. Now, as my project gets bigger, I will move this stitch marker up because this diagonal is going to move as it goes up. So I'll move this stitch marker along with me in order to get my attention in that particular space. And as long as I pay attention to my numbers, my diagonals, everything's going to work out great and it's going to be beautiful. Now, some of you might be wondering, well, what do I do with all these extra chains at the beginning of my work? And that is a simple fix. Just very carefully pull it out and unravel it until you get to the end. When you get it unraveled to the end, you just take your hook and pull it on through and boom. If you don't know, I am on Instagram, so please tag me in any pictures that you have of any color pulling projects that you have created with my tutorials. I would love to see those there. Also, remember, I have a Premier affiliate link, so if you feel so inclined to help out my channel, if you click my link below in the description box and shop with Premier, that'll help me out. I really appreciate you guys coming by, and happy pulling!